So RTL placed a 9-figure investment into SpotXchange, and I think outside of the money itself, it provides a lot of synergy and opportunity for SpotX as a company. First and foremost, it gets us closer to the TV business in terms of giving us a blueprint on how a major broadcaster and content producer really operates. So in figuring out, and we've begun to do this, we've begun to staff behind really programmatic TV. How does a technology like ours fit into that business model? We really sort of have an inside track on how that's going to work. They're also really prominent in Europe. We saw triple-digit percentage growth in Europe as it was last year. Obviously, they're going to really help us chart our path throughout the European region, which quite frankly is much more fragmented than the US market. So you have language barriers, far different cultures from country to country, and you'll see some news from us early this year around new office openings specifically in the European region. They're also a major premium content producer with their Fremantle ownership, so understanding how traditionally linear content comes to digital and the sort of distribution path behind that content is really valuable for us as well.
That's great. So I think when you look at the landscape of 2015, what is that, inside or outside of that investment, what does that mean for your clients? What are you building that's going to be really impactful in 2015? And how does that affect the overall ecosystem as well?
Yeah, sure. I think publishers are finding, and many publishers are encountering this at scale already, programmatic buying is becoming more and more prominent. I don't think that's a surprise for anyone. Unfortunately, legacy ad serving systems really struggle with a lot of the modern buying styles, whether that be programmatic or whether that be a tag-based execution with still rotational creative or real-time ad decisioning. Our system is designed from the ground up to support those models. We've also been aggressively building traditional ad serving tools so publishers can do this all in one place. So they no longer need 2 or 3 separate systems in order to manage these style buys. They can manage it holistically on one platform. So I know that's been a big focal point of ours. And of course, the more and more prominent programmatic advertising, or I should say audience-focused advertising, real-time ad decisioning, the more important that stuff gets, the more wind at our back in making sure that publishers can manage that type of business effectively with traditional media executions.
So when you talk about, programmatic, which I think has become a verb for some reason in our industry, but when you think about that, what's the biggest struggle that you find publishers are having, and what are some of the things that you guys are trying to do to mitigate that process?
So and I actually came from the publishing side before joining SpotXchange, but it's a completely different setup. It's a completely different thought process. It requires different strategy, different skill sets, different technology. So let's not kid each other. It's a fundamental change for publishers, and they have to make changes really across their organization from how they approach monetization. There are definitely big shifts in control and in terms of process from, okay, I get an ad tag and a raw asset and a paper IO. I take that tag or asset, I traffic it into my ad server. I sort of pull all the levers and control all the delivery. Of course, I'm optimizing based off of what the buyer is telling me, but still all those levers are sort of under my control. Now we're in an environment where publishers are surfacing inventory. Buyers are sort of evaluating impression by impression, sort of the signals being thrown off, whether it's the behavioral data behind that user, where that user's coming from, what device that user's on, and making an on-the-fly real-time decision as to whether or not they want to serve an ad, and then which creative they want to serve, what price they want to pay to serve that ad, and all these things are happening in a matter of milliseconds. So as you can imagine, that's a vastly different process, and publishers require tools and technology that enable them to manage that effectively.
So with RTL specifically, but even outside of RTL, are you starting to have to teach this to the linear television side? Is this a conversation that you guys are actively having, and are they receptive to it, or is this something that you're just relying on the digital folks inside those publishing buildings to kind of bring their brethren with them?
Yeah, I mean, to date, a lot of the conversations are sort of split. We talk to digital folks and the linear folks are a separate group. We're certainly starting to see a convergence there, but in reality, linear TV is a much larger business from a dollar and cent perspective than digital video. So we definitely want to take the approach of, okay, let's understand how you guys do things. And I know as an organization, we've been paying a lot of attention and doing a lot of listening to how that side of the business operates, not necessarily trying to force our way of doing business onto the linear side, but more understanding how they do business and how technology like ours can really help. So it's sort of a different approach than saying, okay, this is how things are going to be done. It's more about listening to some of the struggles and challenges they have and figuring out how a platform like ours can help them be more effective in operating their business as well.
So do you think that 2015 is a year that you'll start to see true convergence in digital and linear, and you'll start to have a similar conversation with the same people that have decisioning across the board, or do you think that we're still a year or two away from being able to have that?
Well, I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but I do think the sort of consumer motivated trends are going to force the communication and sort of working together of those separate entities, right? I mean, consumers are more and more ingesting content on OTT devices, on mobile phones, and if we don't figure out a way to sort of bring those two areas together, you're going to see that sort of degradation in the currency, for lack of a better word, in terms of viewership on linear video dropping, and the folks in that space encountering the problem of the sort of fragmentation, where it's no longer a 30-channel world, right? It's a 300-plus channel world. It's no longer just one screen, right? It's multiple screens and multiple delivery methods. So I think the industry is going to be forced to really think about video holistically across all screens versus sort of the siloed approach we've seen to date.
So do you think that, in the near future that agencies and brand marketers might actually just start buying audience and not necessarily know where the impression is?
I think context is always going to matter to some extent. So I wouldn't say that where the impression serves won't matter at all. I think you are certainly going to see a balance of, historically using content as the only proxy for audience, and now being able to truly understand who those audiences are. I think you're going to see certainly a balance between context and audience moving forward.
And so final question, one company other than your own in 2015 that you think is really interesting?
Well, I'm really interested in the wearable space. So instead of saying Apple or something that's a mainstream product, I will say a company called FitAd, who a friend of mine actually recently founded, which sort of brings the advertising market to wearable devices. I'm really interested to see how that plays out, and it could be a totally different dynamic based on how those devices are used. So I'm really excited to hear how they do.